Hi, I'm Nancy and I blog at Do Small Things with Love. And since I have so many embroidery projects on my blog, I thought I would take some time to do some tutorials on the various stitches and techniques that I use there. So we're going to start with the most basic, the first type of embroidery I ever did, which was cross stitch. So cross stitch usually comes with a pattern or a kit. And you can do anything with cross stitch. For example, this is a stocking I made for my son. That came with a kit. It was fully designed. All the thread colors came with it and everything. So it can be really intricate like this. This is a pattern that I'm working on for my Etsy shop right now. Much simpler. And the cool thing about cross stitch is that it's easy to make geometric shapes. Because that's the whole thing. Cross stitch is it's like pixel art. And it's all about counting. It's very simple as long as you have a pattern and you have a lot of time because it's pretty tedious. Okay, so this is a pretty basic video on how to start cross stitching. So if you have done it at all, you probably want to skip to a more advanced video, but this is for someone that has never done this at all. So if you want to start cross stitching, the things you'll need, first of all, cross stitch has specific fabric called Aida cloth. This is a 14 count Aida cloth. It's the most common. It's what usually a pattern calls for unless you're starting with a very beginner pattern. It's available at all craft stores, including Walmart. It comes in all different colors, and you can also tint it, and I have a tutorial on my blog, and I'll leave the link for that at the end of the video. It also comes in a bigger count, like an 11 count Aida cloth is bigger and the stitches will be bigger, and that's pretty common to find too. So you need your Aida cloth. This is in an embroidery hoop, and this is a plastic embroidery hoop that's good for while you work on it. If you can see, it's got a little lip on the inner ring, and that makes sure that it locks tight so it doesn't slip while you're working on it. This is a more basic wooden embroidery hoop that you can use while you're working on it, but it doesn't hold the fabric as tight. But I do like these wooden embroidery hoops for displaying my work after I'm done because they're cuter. You also need a pattern. You can find patterns anywhere, especially in my Etsy shop if you would like to go get one there. This is an example of a pattern I have listed there now. It's of Mary and Jesus. And it's simple, it's only 2 colors. Once you have your pattern, you also need embroidery thread, and it comes in lots of different colors. The most common type is DMC thread. That's again available anywhere, and it has universal numbers. And you also need a needle. Okay, so I just use basic embroidery needles. You can get a special cross stitch one that has kind of a duller point, but I just use basic ones. Okay, so let's get started. See how your supplies. The first thing you need to do is, of course, put your Aida cloth in the hoop. Once it's in there, and make sure if you're doing a pattern that either you've created or bought just the pattern, make sure that you have plenty extra when you cut your Aida cloth, that it's tons, because I'm notorious for not centering my projects very well, and then you're happy you have extra. But first, center your project. You kind of want to find the center of your hoop. That's where you're going to start. You're always going to start from the center of your pattern and the center of your fabric. It's easy just to fold it in fourths before you put it in here and maybe make a little hole there so you can see where it is. Patterns also come, they're marked. This isn't a very good example, I guess, but they oftentimes have a little mark like this that will show you the center, and then there'll be another one going horizontally so you can find the center. You don't have to be exact with either your fabric or the pattern, but it's good to start as close to the center as possible. Then you're not going to run out of Aida cloth while you're stitching. So first things first, the thread comes not on these little spools, but I wrap it on it to keep it neater. Cut a length of string, don't cut it too long, otherwise you'll probably be struggling with knots. This is a 3-string, there's 6 strings here, but I usually only stitch with 2. Sometimes a pattern will call for stitching with 3 at a time. The easiest way to separate it is you can kind of see all 6 threads. You take one and you just pull it up, And then you take another thread and just, otherwise this is a really common place to get knots. So you pull it up, put them together, and straighten them out. Threading a needle, I know there's lots of people that thread needles differently. I lick it, don't judge me. And I flatten it out with my needle like that. And then I stick my needle on, and of course, pressure's on. All right, there. Okay, so you have it. For beginning cross stitch, I encourage people to put a knot at the end of their thread, and I know some people don't like to do that, especially once you get more advanced. But since we're starting at the beginning, we're gonna do that. And here's a cool trick for knotting your thread. So I have my thread with a tail on it, wrap it around so it's like a circle. So I have my end of my thread and my needle. Put the thread like that, wrap it around 3 times, 1, 2, 3. Hold it tight like that. Pull your needle through, oops. And boom, knot right at the end of the thread. Do you see it? Sometimes I do it twice so that I make sure it doesn't pull through my 8 o'clock. 1, 2, 3. Pull it tight. Right at the end. There. See? Can you see it? Anyways, okay. I can redo that, or you can rewind the video if that didn't make sense. Okay, so again, I'm going to start in the middle. So that's a lot of setup. Cross stitch is very basic. It's just tedious. It takes a long time. Okay, so my first stitch, I'm going to start in the middle, come up from the back. The biggest thing to get used to is just being able to train your needle to come up from the back where you want it to. So pull it up from the back, make sure your knot stays. And we're always, cross stitches always go from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, and then from the bottom right corner to the top left corner, okay? So, is this all right? So I come up there, I'm gonna stitch up across and down. Start at the bottom and stitch over. And that's my first X. And the way that you make a project look really professional is by having all of your stitches exactly like that. From the bottom left to the top right, bottom right to the top left, every single time. When I first started cross stitching and was in 4-H, I remember I had my 4-H judge take out a magnifying glass to see if all of my crosses were exactly the same, which of course they weren't. And I realized that that is actually pretty important, not just for snooty 4-H judges. Okay, so you just keep going along, and that's basically all it is. That is the entire process of cross stitch, from the bottom left to the top right, bottom right to the top left, over and over and over again, following your pattern. And so if I was doing this pattern, what I recommend doing is taking a pencil and following along, crossing out the stitches as you go. The only other thing, oftentimes, like if this red was represented in this area, to get up to this area, I would recommend you cut your thread, tie it off in the back, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Tie another knot and start up here because you want your back to be as clean as possible. Okay, so let's say that's my last stitch. It's very basic. This is how you tie off most embroidery projects. Go back, kind of stitch through some of these previous stitches that you've already done. I usually stitch through twice just because I did all this hard work. I don't want it to fall out. Cut my thread and I'm done. And start with the next color. And that is a very basic on how to start a beginner cross stitch project.